My name is Patricia, and I am 63 years old. For the past 8 years, I lovingly cared for my aging mother, often turning down lucrative art restoration projects to remain by her side during her final journey. I poured my professional skill, my precious time, and my own hard-earned money into meticulously restoring our family's treasured heirlooms, preserving generations of history as a sacred testament to my unwavering devotion and respect for our heritage. After Mother's memorial service, as we gathered to remember her beautiful life, Aunt Carol approached me with eyes seething with decades of buried envy and resentment. Without warning, she accused me of stealing precious family heirlooms, her voice dripping with malicious accusation. My own daughter Jennifer, influenced by her ambitious fiancé Michael, and Carol's poisonous whispers coldly demanded that I immediately produce the supposedly missing pieces or confess to my theft. My heart shattered completely. My lifetime of honesty was twisted into deceit. My sacred trust as both daughter and mother was utterly destroyed in a single devastating moment. Yet hidden in my studio lay my meticulous restoration logs and countless detailed photographs that proved their vicious lies beyond any doubt. More crucially, Mother, having long recognized Carol's envious nature and manipulative tendencies, had secretly recorded her true wishes and concerns about her sister's character. They had gravely underestimated an art restorer's professional precision and a mother's protective foresight. Their vengeful scheme would completely unravel, exposing their malice and reclaiming my shattered honor. 3 days after we laid Mother to rest in the peaceful cemetery where she had often walked during her healthier years, I was still reeling from grief when Jennifer arrived at my home with Michael and Aunt Carol in tow. The moment I opened my front door, I could see the cold determination in Jennifer's eyes, a hardness I had never witnessed in my daughter's face during all her 28 years of life. "Mom, we need to talk about Grandma's heirlooms," Jennifer announced, without even offering a greeting or acknowledgement of my obvious grief. Her voice carried an accusatory edge that made my stomach clench with sudden dread. "There are some serious discrepancies that need to be addressed immediately." I invited them into my living room, the same space where Mother and I had spent countless hours discussing her wishes for the family treasures I had so carefully maintained and restored. Carol settled herself into Mother's favorite chair with an air of theatrical authority, while Michael remained standing his posture, suggesting he was prepared for some kind of confrontation. "Patricia, dear," Carol began, her voice dripping with false concern and barely concealed malice. "I hate to bring this up so soon after our loss, but there are some very troubling inconsistencies regarding Mother's heirloom collection. Several very valuable pieces appear to be missing from the inventory we discussed years ago." She produced a wrinkled piece of paper from her purse, waving it dramatically as if it contained irrefutable evidence of wrongdoing. "I have records here of specific items that Mother treasured, pieces that should have been present in her collection. The antique silver tea service, the hand-painted porcelain figurines, the mahogany jewelry box with the mother-of-pearl inlay. Where are these items, Patricia?" My heart began racing as I realized the magnitude of what was happening. "Carol, those pieces have all been carefully restored and are exactly where Mother wanted them to be. I have detailed documentation of every restoration project, every repair, every cleaning I've performed over the years." But Carol was already shaking her head with practiced theatricality, turning to address Jennifer and Michael, rather than responding to my explanation. "Your mother has always had a covetous streak, Jennifer. Even as children, She would take things that didn't belong to her, claiming she was just borrowing them or taking care of them. I've seen this pattern throughout our lives. The accusation hit me like a physical blow, so unexpected and vicious that I struggled to find words to defend myself. Carol, that's absolutely untrue, and you know it. I have never taken anything that wasn't rightfully mine or that Mother didn't specifically ask me to care for. Michael stepped forward, his expression calculating and cold. Patricia, we're not here to argue about childhood memories. We're here because there are valuable family assets that appear to be missing, and as Jennifer's fiance and future family member, I have a responsibility to ensure that her inheritance is protected. The way he spoke about Jennifer's inheritance as if it were already his to manage and control sent a chill down my spine. This was about money and power, not about honoring Mother's memory or preserving family treasures. Jennifer's voice cut through my shock with devastating precision. Mom, Michael and Aunt Carol have shown me evidence that you've taken items that should have been part of the estate. Are you really so greedy that you would steal from your own family? How could you betray us like this? The word steal hung in the air like poison, transforming everything I had done out of love and dedication into something sordid and criminal. I felt my world tilting, my reality being rewritten by people who should have known my character better than anyone. Jennifer, sweetheart, please listen to me, I pleaded, reaching toward my daughter with trembling hands. I have never stolen anything from anyone, least of all from Mother or from you. Every single item in this house has been documented, photographed, and restored with the utmost care and respect. But Jennifer pulled away from my touch, her face hardening further. Then where are the missing pieces, Mom? If you're so innocent, why can't you produce them right now? Carol's smile was triumphant and cruel as she watched my relationship with my daughter crumble before her eyes. I think we all know the answer to that question, don't we? Patricia has always believed she deserved more than her fair share. She convinced Mother to give her access to everything, and then she helped herself to whatever caught her fancy. Michael nodded gravely, as if he were a judge, rendering a verdict. Patricia, if you've taken items that rightfully belong to Jennifer's inheritance, we will find out. We won't stand for theft regardless of family relationships. You need to understand that we're prepared to take legal action if necessary. Within hours of their departure, David Carroll's son had begun a systematic campaign to destroy my reputation throughout our close-knit community. His social media posts, carefully crafted to appear concerned rather than malicious, began appearing on local community groups and neighborhood forums. So sad to see family members who can't be trusted with their own relatives' belongings. One post read, "When someone takes advantage of an elderly woman's trust and steals from the estate, it really makes you wonder what else they might be capable of." Another post was even more direct. "My cousin Patricia has been dishonest about our grandmother's estate. Some very valuable family heirlooms have mysteriously disappeared after she took control of everything. Just goes to show you can't trust anyone these days, even family." The effect was immediate and devastating. People I had known for decades began treating me with suspicion and cold distance. Fellow art restorers questioned my professional ethics. Neighbors who had once greeted me warmly now crossed the street to avoid conversation. Carol and Michael's campaign escalated quickly, pressuring Jennifer to completely sever ties with me until the missing heirlooms were returned or properly accounted for. My daughter's phone calls, which had once been a daily source of joy and connection, became infrequent and strained before stopping entirely. The silence from Jennifer was perhaps the most painful aspect of the entire ordeal. For 28 years, we had talked nearly every day, sharing our joys and sorrows, our hopes and fears. Now there was nothing but an echoing emptiness, where her voice should have been a void filled only with the knowledge that she believed I was capable of theft and deception. David's online slander campaign grew bolder and more public as days passed. He began tagging local business leaders, art gallery owners, and even news outlets in his posts, spreading the narrative that I was a dishonest art restorer who had betrayed my own family's trust. The damage to my professional reputation was swift and merciless, as potential clients canceled projects and colleagues distanced themselves from the controversy. I found myself living in a nightmare where everything I had worked to build over 6 decades of honest living was being systematically destroyed by lies and manipulation. The grief of losing mother was compounded by the agony of losing my daughter and watching my community turn against me based on fabricated accusations. Yet even in my darkest moments, I held on to the knowledge that truth had a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it was buried under layers of deceit and malice. They had chosen the wrong person to frame the wrong victim to destroy. An art restorer's life was built on documentation precision and meticulous record-keeping. Their lives would eventually crumble under the weight of evidence they never knew existed. 2 weeks after the initial confrontation, when the whispers in our small town had grown to a roar of gossip and speculation, a formal legal letter arrived by certified mail. The envelope bearing the law firm's letterhead felt heavy in my hands, weighted with the gravity of accusations that could destroy everything I had spent my lifetime building. The letter, written in the cold, clinical language of legal threats, demanded that I immediately confess to stealing family heirlooms and return all misappropriated items to their rightful owners within 30 days. Failing that, I would face a public lawsuit for theft of inheritance, with additional charges for emotional distress and defamation of the accuser's characters. Most chillingly, the letter included a restraining order request against any sale or transfer of my personal assets, effectively freezing my financial life until the matter was resolved. They were not content with destroying my reputation. They intended to trap me in a legal and financial prison while they systematically dismantled my existence. The bitter realization of the true scope of their plan hit me like ice water when I overheard strangers discussing my situation in the local cafe where I had enjoyed countless peaceful mornings over the years. 2 women I recognized but didn't know personally were dissecting my character with the casual cruelty of people who believed they had uncovered scandalous truth. Patricia always seemed so sweet and professional, one woman said, stirring sugar into her coffee with deliberate slowness. But you really never know what people are capable of when money's involved. They say she's been stealing from her own mother for years. I heard she convinced the old woman to change her will, the other replied, with obvious relish. Took advantage of her declining mental state to get access to valuable antiques. Her own daughter had to hire a lawyer to get back what was rightfully hers. Listening to my life being rewritten by strangers who knew nothing about my character or my relationship with mother was devastating beyond description. This wasn't just about missing heirlooms or family disputes. This was a meticulously planned character assassination orchestrated by Carol's pathological envy and executed with Michael's calculating ambition. As I sat in my car outside the cafe, tears streaming down my face, a memory surfaced with startling clarity. 7 years earlier, Carol had been facing severe legal troubles due to her reckless spending and financial mismanagement. Creditors were circling, threatening bankruptcy and public humiliation that would have destroyed her carefully maintained social standing. I remembered the desperate phone call she had made, not to me directly, but to Mother, knowing I would overhear the conversation. Carol never explicitly asked for help, but her implied need was crystal clear. That night, I made the decision that would eventually fund her rescue from financial ruin. I liquidated a significant portion of my carefully saved retirement annuity funds I had accumulated through decades of careful budgeting and sacrifice money meant to secure my own future independence. I arranged for the payment to be made anonymously through a legal intermediary, ensuring that Carol would never know the true source of her salvation. The mysterious benefactor who saved Carol from bankruptcy was her own sister, the woman she was now systematically destroying with lies and manipulation. The bitter irony was almost unbearable. I had sacrificed my own financial security to protect someone who was now using her freedom from financial ruin to orchestrate my social and professional destruction. Carol's psychological warfare reached new heights of calculated cruelty when she orchestrated another accidental encounter at the monthly opening of the Riverside Art Gallery, an event I had attended faithfully for over 15 years. She knew I would be there, knew it was one of the few professional spaces where I still felt welcome and respected. She approached me during the wine and cheese reception, her smile radiant with false warmth, as she greeted me loudly enough for nearby art patrons and gallery staff to hear every word. "Patricia, darling, you look so frail and stressed lately. Are you taking care of yourself properly?" Her voice carried just the right note of concerned sympathy to draw attention from other attendees, while subtly reinforcing the narrative that I was somehow deteriorating under the weight of guilty conscience. Several people I had known professionally for years turned to observe our interaction, their expressions curious and slightly uncomfortable. "I've been so worried about you since Mother's passing." Carol continued her performance, flawless in its apparent sincerity. Grief can make people do things they wouldn't normally consider, can it? Sometimes the stress of loss makes us act in ways that are completely unlike our true character. The implication was clear to everyone within earshot. My supposed crimes were the result of grief-induced mental instability rather than inherent dishonesty. It was a masterful piece of psychological manipulation designed to generate pity rather than condemnation, while still reinforcing the core narrative of my guilt. Gallery staff and fellow art enthusiasts who had once valued my professional expertise now regarded me with a mixture of suspicion and sympathy, unsure whether to treat me as a criminal or a mentally unstable person in need of professional help. Either way, my credibility and professional standing were further eroded by Carol's perfectly executed public performance. Meanwhile, Michael had begun planting seeds of a different but equally devastating narrative among family members and Jennifer's friends. His whispered concerns about my erratic behavior and paranoid accusations were designed to build a case for questioning my mental competency and my ability to manage my own affairs. Patricia's been making some very strange claims. He told anyone who would listen. She's accusing Carol of lying and manipulation, but she can't produce any evidence to support these accusations. She seems confused about what happened to the missing items, almost like she's forgotten taking them. The suggestion that I might be experiencing early-stage dementia or some other form of cognitive decline was particularly insidious because it provided a convenient explanation for both my supposed crimes and my vigorous denials. If I was mentally compromised, then my protests of innocence could be dismissed as the confused ramblings of someone who no longer understood reality. Michael's long-term strategy became clear as he began subtle inquiries about guardianship procedures and the legal requirements for taking control of an elderly person's financial affairs. He was positioning himself as Jennifer's concerned fiancé, worried about my welfare and my ability to make sound decisions about my remaining assets. The possibility that they might succeed in having me declared mentally incompetent, giving them legal control over my property and finances while continuing their search for the supposedly missing heirlooms, filled me with a terror unlike anything I had ever experienced. They weren't just trying to steal my reputation. They were planning to steal my independence and autonomy as well. But even as their web of lies grew more elaborate and their attacks more coordinated, I held on to the knowledge that they had made a critical error in choosing me as their victim. Art restoration was a profession built on meticulous documentation, precise record-keeping, and photographic evidence of every stage of the restoration process. Every family heirloom that had passed through my care over the years had been thoroughly documented with before, during, and after photographs. Every restoration technique, every cleaning solution, every repair had been recorded in detailed logs that would prove conclusively that nothing had been stolen or hidden. More importantly, they had underestimated Mother's intelligence and her understanding of Carol's true character. The woman who had raised me to value honesty and integrity had taken her own precautions against the sister she knew to be capable of exactly this kind of manipulation and deceit. The truth was there waiting to be revealed, and when it finally came to light, it would destroy their lies as completely as they had tried to destroy me. The final legal blow came on a Tuesday morning in October, delivered with the cold efficiency of professional character assassination. The certified letter from Carol and Michael's attorney was more than a demand. It was a formal declaration of war against my very existence as Jennifer's mother and a member of our family. The document demanded that I immediately cease all contact with Jennifer and publicly acknowledge my theft of the missing heirlooms. The threatened lawsuit would seek not only full restitution for the supposedly stolen items, but also damages for emotional distress, defamation of character, and what they termed elder abuse through financial manipulation. Most devastatingly, they would pursue these charges publicly, ensuring that every detail of their accusations would be broadcast through local media and court records that would permanently destroy whatever remained of my reputation and professional standing. This wasn't just about getting money or property. It was about ensuring that I would never recover from the damage they were inflicting. The legal expulsion from my daughter's life felt like having my heart surgically removed while I remained conscious to feel every cut. For 28 years, Jennifer had been the center of my world, the relationship that gave meaning to every sacrifice and struggle. Now I was being formally banned from contact with her, branded as a criminal who posed a threat to her well-being. In my desperation to salvage what remained of our relationship, I made one final heartbroken phone call to Jennifer. My hands trembled as I dialed her number, praying that somewhere beneath the poison Carol and Michael had poured into her mind, my daughter still existed. "Jennifer, sweetheart, please," I began when she answered my voice, breaking with the weight of everything I needed her to understand. "I'm begging you to remember who I am, who I've always been. Remember our history together, the love we've shared, the way I've supported you through every challenge and celebrated every triumph." I poured my heart out to her, recounting specific memories that only a devoted mother would cherish, the nights I stayed awake when she had pneumonia as a child, the college tuition I paid by working extra restoration projects, the wedding plans we had excitedly discussed before Michael's influence poisoned our relationship. I have never stolen anything from anyone, I pleaded. I have documentation proving every claim they've made is false. Mother trusted me with her treasures because she knew I would honor her wishes and preserve our family history with the respect it deserves. Jennifer's response was delivered in a voice so cold and rehearsed that it barely sounded like my daughter at all. Mom, I've seen the evidence. Michael and Aunt Carol have shown me proof of what you've done. I can't trust you anymore. I can't have someone in my life who would steal from their own family and then lie about it. The finality in her voice was like a door slamming shut on 28 years of unconditional love. My daughter, the precious child I had raised with such devotion and hope, had chosen to believe the worst possible interpretation of my character, rather than trust the mother who had never given her reason to doubt my integrity. That evening, as I sat alone in my quiet house, surrounded by the heirlooms I had so carefully maintained and the restoration equipment that represented my life's work, my phone buzzed with a social media notification. Michael had posted a photograph that felt like a dagger thrust directly into my already shattered heart. The image showed Jennifer's hand adorned with an enormous diamond engagement ring that must have cost more than most people's annual salary. The caption, clearly crafted to inflict maximum psychological damage, read, "Finally getting the life we deserve. No more negativity holding us back. Ready to start fresh with people who truly support our happiness." The timing was deliberately cruel, posted just days after the legal letter had arrived, and hours after my devastating phone call with Jennifer. This ostentatious display of wealth was Michael's way of showing me that he was now reaping the financial benefits of destroying my relationship with my daughter, that my exclusion from their lives had cleared the way for their prosperity. The image haunted me through a sleepless night, but it also triggered a memory that had been buried beneath layers of grief and trauma. As I held my phone staring at that photograph of my daughter's ring, I remembered something Mother had told me years earlier about hiding important things in plain sight. I rushed to Mother's old music box, a beautiful piece I had restored for her several years before her death. Hidden beneath the velvet lining of the jewelry compartment, I found a small digital recorder that I had never noticed before. With shaking hands, I pressed play and heard my mother's voice speaking clearly and deliberately. "Patricia, if you're listening to this, it means Carol has probably tried to cause trouble after I'm gone," Mother's voice said with startling clarity. "I've known for years that she resents you, resents the relationship we have, resents your talent and your honesty. She's always believed she deserved more than life gave her." The recording continued with devastating precision, documenting Mother's explicit wishes for me to inherit specific items and her deep concerns about Carol's manipulative nature and tendency to fabricate stories when it served her purposes. "I want you to have the silver tea service, the porcelain figurines, and the mahogany jewelry box. These items represent our family's history, and I trust only you to preserve them properly." More importantly, the recording captured conversations where Mother expressed her fear that Carol might try to challenge her wishes after her death, predicting with uncanny accuracy the exact scenario that was now unfolding. "Carol has always been jealous of what others have. She'll probably claim I promised her things I never promised, or that items are missing when they're exactly where they should be. But the most damning evidence came from my own meticulous professional habits. I retrieved my restoration logs from the fireproof safe, where I kept all my important documents, spreading out years of detailed records that documented every single family heirloom that had passed through my care. Each log entry included precise descriptions of the item's condition, detailed photographs taken before any work began, step-by-step documentation of restoration processes, and final photographs showing the completed work. The dates, times, and locations of every piece were recorded with the precision that had made me successful in my profession. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. Every item Carol claimed was missing was thoroughly documented in my logs, with photographic proof of its exact condition and location. The silver tea service sat in my dining room, beautifully restored and displayed exactly as Mother had requested. The porcelain figurines graced my mantelpiece, each one photographed and cataloged. The mahogany jewelry box rested on my dresser, its mother-of-pearl inlay gleaming from the careful restoration work I had performed. None of these items were missing. None had been stolen. They were exactly where Mother wanted them to be cared for by the daughter she trusted to preserve the family's legacy with honor and integrity. As I sat surrounded by the evidence of their lies and the proof of my innocence, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The broken, devastated woman who had been gaslit and manipulated for weeks was transforming into someone far more dangerous to their carefully constructed narrative. They had chosen to destroy me based on the assumption that I was a helpless older woman with no resources to fight back. They had no idea that their victim was a professional with decades of experience in documentation and preservation, someone who understood the value of evidence and the power of irrefutable proof. More than that, they had underestimated the love between a mother and daughter, the protective instincts that had led Mother to preserve the truth, even from beyond the grave. Their greed and malice had blinded them to the possibility that their lies could be exposed with such devastating completeness. I carefully organized the evidence, arranging Mother's recordings, my restoration logs, and the photographic documentation in a sequence that told the complete story of their deception and my innocence. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of their credibility proof that would not only vindicate me, but expose them as the calculated manipulators they truly were. They had awakened something in me that they were completely unprepared to face, a woman who knew her worth, understood her truth, and possessed the evidence to destroy their lies as completely as they had tried to destroy her. The transformation from devastated victim to determined warrior happened overnight, like a phoenix rising from the ashes of everything they had tried to destroy. Armed with Mother's audio recordings, my meticulous restoration logs, and years of photographic documentation, I felt a steely determination replace the crushing despair that had consumed me for weeks. This evidence wasn't just my vindication, it was the sword of truth that would cut through their web of lies and expose them for the calculating fraudsters they truly were. Monday morning at 9 o'clock sharp, I placed my first call to the law offices of Margaret Chen, one of the most respected elder law attorneys in our state. Margaret specialized in estate fraud and defamation cases, with a particular focus on protecting elderly victims from family manipulation and financial abuse. Her reputation for dismantling fraudulent inheritance claims was exactly what I needed for the battle ahead. Ms. Chen, I said, my voice steady and clear for the first time in weeks. I need to discuss pursuing criminal charges for estate fraud, defamation, and conspiracy against my sister-in-law and her accomplices. I have substantial audio and photographic evidence documenting their systematic campaign to defraud me of my rightful inheritance and destroy my reputation in the community. Margaret listened with growing professional excitement as I described the evidence I possessed. When I played excerpts from Mother's recordings and showed her samples of my restoration documentation, her expression shifted from polite interest to intense focus. "Patricia," she said finally, "what you're describing is a textbook case of elder abuse, estate fraud, and criminal conspiracy. We're going to make them pay dearly for every lie they've told and every moment of suffering they've caused you." The formal legal notices hit Carol, Michael, and Jennifer like lightning strikes they never saw coming. The certified letters from Margaret's office detailed our intent to pursue both civil and criminal charges for fraud, defamation, forgery, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny. Each defendant received individually tailored charges that reflected their specific role in the systematic campaign to destroy my life and steal my inheritance. Carol's initial reaction was exactly what I had anticipated, a mixture of stunned disbelief and arrogant dismissal that demonstrated how completely she had underestimated my resolve and resources. Her response, delivered through her hastily retained attorney, characterized my legal action as the desperate, delusional ravings of a senile old woman who refuses to accept reality and doesn't understand the legal consequences of filing frivolous lawsuits. Michael's reaction was even more telling in its calculated condescension. His lawyer's letter dismissed my evidence as fabricated documents and doctored recordings created by someone experiencing obvious mental deterioration. They clearly believed I lacked both the sophistication to create compelling evidence and the financial resources to sustain a prolonged legal battle. Jennifer's response was the most heartbreaking of all. Her attorney's letter expressed deep concern for my mental health and suggested that my accusations against her fiancé and aunt were evidence of grief-induced paranoia that required professional intervention rather than legal action. While my enemies wallowed in their false confidence, I was methodically building an unassailable case with the precision and attention to detail that had defined my professional career. Working closely with Margaret, I began collaborating with Robert Hutchins, a retired private investigator who specialized in insurance fraud and document authentication, and Elena Martinez, a forensic photography expert from my senior photography club, who had extensive experience in legal evidence preparation. Robert's analysis of the supposed evidence Carol had presented revealed obvious inconsistencies and signs of recent fabrication. The missing inventory list she had waved around during our confrontation contained items that had never existed in Mother's collection, described in language that Mother never would have used, and written on paper that forensic analysis proved was manufactured years after Mother's supposed inventory date. Elena's examination of my restoration photographs confirmed their authenticity beyond any possible doubt. The digital metadata, the consistency of lighting and background elements, and the progression of wear patterns on the heirlooms created an irrefutable timeline that demolished every claim Carol had made about missing or stolen items. Most importantly, I began carefully sharing news of my legal action with key community figures who had known Mother personally and could testify to both her character and her explicit wishes regarding the family heirlooms. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, Mother's longtime physician, confirmed that Mother had been mentally sharp until her final days and had spoken frequently about her trust in my judgment regarding the family treasures. Father Michael O'Brien, who had provided Mother's spiritual counsel for over 20 years, recalled specific conversations where Mother had expressed concern about Carol's manipulative tendencies and her determination to ensure that the family heirlooms remained with someone who would preserve them properly. The message I sent to Jennifer through Margaret was brief but unmistakable. The truth will emerge, Jennifer, no matter how painful it is for you to face. Your grandmother's own words will speak from beyond the grave, and you will hear exactly what she thought about the people you've chosen to believe over your own mother. Carol's escalation was swift and predictably vicious. Realizing that I possessed far more evidence and resources than she had anticipated, she abandoned any pretense of family concern and revealed the calculating manipulator she had always been beneath her carefully constructed facade. Her attorney sent increasingly threatening letters promising to destroy Patricia's remaining reputation and countersue for frivolous litigation, emotional distress, and defamation of character. Michael's participation in this escalation exposed the depth of his own calculating nature. Rather than distancing himself from Carol's obviously fraudulent claims, he doubled down on his support, publicly dismissing my accusations as evidence of senile fantasy and desperate attention-seeking behavior from someone who can't accept that her lies have been exposed. David's online campaign reached new heights of vicious creativity as he fabricated increasingly outrageous stories about my supposed mental instability and professional incompetence. His social media posts began claiming that I had been investigated for fraud during my restoration career, that I had stolen from previous clients, and that my accusations against Carol were part of a pattern of paranoid delusions that had plagued me for years. Every threatening letter, every public attack on my character, every attempt to discredit my evidence only strengthened my case and validated my decision to pursue justice through the legal system. They were providing additional documentation of the very harassment and defamation I was already preparing to present in court. As I watched their desperate attempts to silence me through intimidation and character assassination, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, the intoxicating power of holding irrefutable truth in my hands. They had spent weeks systematically destroying my reputation based on lies and manipulation, never imagining that their victim possessed the evidence to expose their fraud completely. The broken woman they had tried to create was gone forever, replaced by someone far more dangerous to their carefully constructed narrative, a professional who understood the value of documentation, a daughter who possessed her mother's final testimony, and a fighter who refused to be silenced by bullies and thieves. The weeks following my legal declaration transformed me into someone I barely recognized, someone who moved through the world with the quiet confidence that comes from possessing unshakable truth. Working with Margaret Chen and my growing team of expert allies, I had methodically assembled a case so comprehensive and damning that even Carol's expensive legal team would struggle to mount any credible defense. Elena Martinez's forensic analysis of my restoration photographs had revealed something even more powerful than I had initially realized. Not only did my documentation prove the authenticity and location of every supposedly missing heirloom, but Elena had discovered subtle evidence that Carol's missing inventory had been created using photographs stolen from my own files, then doctored to support her false claims. Robert Hutchins's investigation had uncovered a pattern of similar behavior in Carol's past, including insurance claims for stolen jewelry that had later been discovered in her possession, and a previous attempt to challenge the will of a deceased neighbor by claiming oral promises that could never be verified. This wasn't Carol's first attempt at inheritance fraud. It was simply her most ambitious and personal attack. My volunteer work at the Riverside Historical Society had become another form of evidence demonstrating my continued mental acuity, professional competence, and unwavering commitment to preserving cultural heritage. Society members consistently describe me as knowledgeable, detail-oriented, and passionate about historical accuracy, directly contradicting the narrative of mental decline that Carol and Michael were attempting to establish. The opportunity for dramatic public vindication came sooner than I had expected. The annual Northeast Art Restoration Conference, held at the prestigious Marriott downtown, was an event I had attended faithfully for over 15 years. This year's conference was particularly significant because I had been invited to present a paper on innovative techniques for preserving antique textiles, recognition of my professional expertise that made Carol's claims about my incompetence seem even more absurd. Margaret had suggested that my participation in the conference would demonstrate my continued professional standing and mental clarity, providing additional evidence against any claims of cognitive decline. What we hadn't anticipated was that Carol, Michael, and Jennifer would also attend, apparently hoping to monitor my activities or perhaps to publicly confront me in front of my professional colleagues. The conference's opening reception was held in the hotel's elegant ballroom, filled with art restoration professionals, museum curators, and antique dealers from across the region. I was engaged in conversation with Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the curator of American Decorative Arts at the Metropolitan Museum, when I noticed Carol approaching with Michael and Jennifer trailing behind her. Carol had clearly prepared for this encounter, her expression arranged in a mask of concerned sympathy that I recognized as pure theatrical manipulation. She moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who believed she still held the upper hand, apparently unaware that several people in the room had already heard about the legal proceedings through professional networks. "Oh, Patricia, dear," Carol announced loudly enough for nearby conversations to pause. "What a surprise to see you here. Are you sure you should be presenting papers in your current emotional state? Perhaps you should focus on getting the help you obviously need instead of trying to impress people with your supposed expertise." Michael stepped forward with his own calculated smile, his voice carrying the patronizing tone he had perfected during our previous confrontations. "It's really quite sad, isn't it? All these delusional accusations and desperate attempts to avoid taking responsibility for her actions. I keep hoping she'll get the professional help she needs instead of making these false claims against her own family. Their performance was designed to plant seeds of doubt about my mental state and professional competence among people who might be called upon to testify about my character." Several conference attendees had stopped their conversations to observe what appeared to be a family intervention playing out in public. Jennifer stood slightly behind Michael, her discomfort obvious, but her support for his position unwavering. She said nothing, but her presence beside him spoke volumes about her continued allegiance to the people who had poisoned her mind against her own mother. Rather than engaging in the public confrontation they clearly hoped to provoke, I maintained my composure and simply smiled with the quiet confidence of someone who possessed irrefutable evidence of their lies. My restraint seemed to frustrate Carol, who had obviously hoped to provoke an emotional outburst that would validate their claims about my instability. The moment I had been anticipating arrived when Margaret Chen approached our group, her professional demeanor and expensive briefcase immediately commanding attention from everyone in the vicinity. She had been waiting in the hotel lobby for exactly this opportunity, knowing that Carol's arrogance would eventually create the perfect public setting for what came next. Ms. Carol Henderson, Mr. Michael Davidson, and Ms. Jennifer Morrison. Margaret announced with formal precision, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of legal proceedings. "You are hereby served with civil summons for fraud, defamation conspiracy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, along with notice of criminal investigation by the District Attorney's Office for estate fraud and grand larceny. The legal documents were presented with ceremonial dignity in full view of museum curators, restoration professionals, and art dealers who represented the highest levels of our professional community. The official court seals and formal language made it impossible for anyone to dismiss this as mere family drama or personal vendetta. Carol's face went ashen as she realized the implications of being served legal papers for criminal charges in such a public venue. Her carefully constructed image as a concerned family member dealing with a troubled relative was crumbling in real time as witnesses observed her being formally accused of fraud and conspiracy. Michael's composure shattered completely as he recognized that their strategy of discrediting me had not only failed, but had actually provided additional evidence for both civil and criminal prosecution. Every public attack on my character, every social media post questioning my mental state, every attempt to manipulate Jennifer had been documented and would now be presented in court as proof of their systematic conspiracy. Jennifer's shock was perhaps the most profound of all, as she began to understand that her fiancé and aunt were facing serious criminal charges based on evidence she had never been allowed to examine. The magnitude of their deception was finally becoming clear to her, though whether she would have the courage to acknowledge her mistake remained uncertain. The satisfaction I felt watching their confident facades crumble was beyond description. For weeks they had treated me like a powerless old woman who could be dismissed and destroyed without consequences. Now they were discovering that their victim had not only survived their assault, but had methodically prepared to expose them with devastating legal precision. Dr. Mitchell and several other conference attendees approached me after Carol's group retreated in stunned silence, offering their support and expressing amazement at the strength of evidence I had apparently assembled. Word of the dramatic confrontation spread quickly through the professional community, creating a buzz of support for my vindication that would prove invaluable in rebuilding my reputation. Building on the devastating public humiliation at the Art Restoration Conference, Margaret and I moved swiftly to consolidate our advantage and deliver the final crushing blow to Carol's credibility. The criminal investigation that the District Attorney's Office had opened based on our evidence was proceeding with remarkable speed, driven by the clear documentation of fraud and the potential for additional victims coming forward. Margaret's strategic decision to coordinate with investigative journalist David Park, a former student who had built a reputation for exposing white-collar crime and elder abuse, would prove to be the nuclear weapon in our arsenal of truth. David's preliminary investigation had already uncovered additional evidence of Carol's fraudulent behavior, including previous attempts to manipulate elderly relatives and a pattern of financial exploitation that extended far beyond her attack on me. The exclusive story that David published in the major regional newspaper was a masterpiece of investigative journalism that instantly transformed public perception of our family conflict. The headline alone was devastating. Audio recordings expose systematic elder abuse and inheritance fraud by trusted family members. The article featured direct, unedited transcripts from Mother's covert recordings, allowing readers to hear in her own words her explicit wishes for the family heirlooms and her prophetic concerns about Carol's manipulative nature. The recordings captured conversations where Mother specifically refused Carol's subtle requests to alter her will, expressing her determination that the family treasures should remain with someone who would preserve them with proper care and respect. Most powerfully, David included compelling before and after restoration photographs that demonstrated not only the authenticity of my work, but the obvious love and skill I had invested in preserving our family's heritage. The contrast between my meticulous documentation and Carol's fabricated claims was so stark that no reasonable person could maintain any doubt about who was telling the truth. The forensic evidence linking David Henderson to the malicious online aliases he had used to defame me was presented with scientific precision, including IP address tracking, linguistic analysis, and digital fingerprints that proved his authorship of the false accusations. David's social media campaign was exposed as a coordinated attack designed to destroy my reputation and isolate me from community support. David Park's investigation had also uncovered financial records showing that Michael had been researching the potential value of Mother's heirloom collection weeks before her death, suggesting that the entire scheme had been premeditated rather than a spontaneous reaction to grief or misunderstanding. The article systematically dismantled every accusation Carol had made against me, contrasting her vague, inconsistent claims with my detailed documentation and professional verification. Elena Martinez was quoted extensively explaining how the forensic analysis of photographs and documents had revealed the deliberate fabrication of evidence designed to support false inheritance claims. Most damning of all, the article revealed that Carol had attempted to contact other elderly relatives in recent months, apparently testing the waters for similar inheritance manipulation schemes. The pattern of behavior that emerged painted a picture of someone who had made a career of exploiting family relationships for financial gain. David Henderson's response to the article was exactly what we had predicted: a desperate and increasingly unhinged campaign to discredit the evidence through personal attacks and wild accusations. His social media posts became progressively more extreme and defamatory, claiming that I had somehow brainwashed Mother into making the recordings, that the restoration photographs had been digitally manipulated, and that the entire investigation was part of a conspiracy involving corrupt lawyers and journalists. Carol and Michael's public statements were only slightly more restrained, but equally ineffective in countering the overwhelming evidence David Park had presented. Their attempts to characterize the audio recordings as taken out of context or misinterpreted fell flat when confronted with Mother's clear, unambiguous statements about her wishes and her concerns about Carol's character. Michael's professional reputation suffered immediate and severe damage as his employer and business associates distanced themselves from the scandal. The revelation that he had been actively participating in a scheme to defraud an elderly woman of her inheritance made him toxic to anyone concerned about ethical conduct or public relations. Jennifer's position became increasingly untenable as friends and extended family members began questioning her judgment and her continued support for people who were now facing serious criminal charges. The expensive engagement ring that Michael had so publicly displayed was now seen as evidence of their ill-gotten gains rather than a symbol of their love and success. The immediate consequences for my accusers were swift and merciless. Carol's social standing in the community evaporated overnight as the full scope of her manipulation and fraud became public knowledge. Former friends and social acquaintances who had initially believed her claims about my mental instability now understood that they had been manipulated by a calculating predator who specialized in exploiting trust and family relationships. Margaret's follow-up interview on the national news program that picked up David Park's story delivered the final devastating blow to any remaining sympathy for my accusers. she announced that the district attorney's office was expanding their investigation to include potential charges of organized fraud and racketeering, given the coordinated nature of the scheme and the evidence of similar attacks on other elderly family members. This case represents far more than a simple family dispute over inheritance, Margaret explained to the national television audience. It's about exposing and prosecuting those who prey on elderly Americans, using family relationships as weapons to steal what rightfully belongs to their victims. The evidence in this case is so overwhelming that we expect additional victims to come forward as news of the investigation spreads. The legal announcement sent shockwaves through Carol's remaining support network and eliminated any possibility of negotiating a quiet settlement that would allow them to escape consequences. Insurance companies began refusing to cover their legal defense costs. Expensive criminal attorneys started demanding substantial retainers up front, and the full weight of their fraudulent actions finally began to register in their calculating minds. As I watched the news coverage from my living room, surrounded by the heirlooms they had tried to steal and the documentation that had exposed their lies, I felt a satisfaction so profound it seemed to heal wounds I hadn't even realized were still bleeding. They had attempted to erase me from my own family's history, to convince the world that I was a delusional old woman whose love for her heritage was actually criminal greed. Instead, their calculated cruelty had awakened something in me that they never could have anticipated: the determination to expose them completely and ensure that their systematic abuse of elderly family members would never happen again to anyone else. 6 months had passed since the national news coverage that sealed Carol's criminal prosecution and public disgrace. The criminal trial had proceeded with devastating efficiency, resulting in Carol's conviction on multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy, along with substantial financial penalties and a suspended jail sentence contingent on her making full restitution for the emotional and financial damage she had caused. Michael had accepted a plea bargain that required him to testify against Carol in exchange for reduced charges, but his professional and social rehabilitation was impossible, given the extensive documentation of his role in the conspiracy. Jennifer had finally broken her engagement after the full scope of Michael's manipulation became undeniable, though our relationship remained strained by the months of betrayal and accusations. Most importantly, the court-ordered psychological evaluation had confirmed what I had known all along: that I was mentally competent, emotionally stable, and fully capable of managing my own affairs. The evaluation report specifically noted that my decision to pursue legal action had been rational, well-founded, and necessary to protect myself from ongoing fraud and harassment. It was on a quiet Tuesday evening in early spring when my phone rang with Carol's number displayed on the caller ID. I had been expecting this call for weeks, knowing that mounting legal fees, social isolation, and the prospect of additional criminal charges would eventually force her to attempt some form of contact. Margaret had prepared me thoroughly for this moment, coaching me on how to handle what would likely be a desperate attempt at manipulation. Carol's voice when I answered was barely recognizable, stripped of the confident condescension that had characterized our previous confrontations. The arrogant woman who had so gleefully destroyed my reputation and relationship with Jennifer was gone, replaced by someone who sounded broken, desperate, and genuinely terrified of the consequences she was finally facing. "Patricia, please, you have to understand that this has gone too far." She began her words, tumbling over each other in barely controlled panic. "The legal fees are bankrupting me. The criminal charges are ruining what's left of my life, and people in town look at me like I'm some kind of monster. You've made your point. You've proven that you were right and I was wrong. Can't we just put this behind us and move on?" I could hear the carefully rehearsed nature of her appeal, the calculated attempt to appear contrite while avoiding any real acknowledgement of the systematic cruelty she had inflicted. Her tone oscillated between desperation and barely suppressed anger, revealing that she still didn't truly understand or accept responsibility for the magnitude of her actions. "The whole family is suffering because of this legal nightmare." Carol continued, her voice taking on the wheedling quality of someone trying to manipulate through guilt. "David can't find work because of the publicity. Michael's career is destroyed, and poor Jennifer is dealing with the social embarrassment of having her private family business broadcast on national television. You're hurting innocent people who were just trying to protect what they thought were their rights." The irony of her words was breathtaking. The woman who had systematically destroyed my reputation, isolated me from my daughter, and attempted to steal my inheritance was now claiming that I was the one causing harm to innocent people. Her complete inability to acknowledge the pain she had inflicted or accept responsibility for the consequences of her choices was exactly what I had expected. My response was calm, measured, and completely devoid of the emotional vulnerability she had exploited so successfully in the past. "Carol, every consequence you're experiencing is the direct result of your own choices. Your decision to fabricate evidence, manipulate Jennifer, and systematically defame my character created this situation. You chose fraud over honesty, greed over family loyalty, and manipulation over genuine communication." I paused, allowing the weight of my words to settle between us before continuing. My pursuit of justice through the legal system was not only appropriate, but necessary to protect myself and potentially other elderly family members from your predatory behavior. The evidence speaks for itself, and the courts have confirmed what I knew all along, that you are a calculating fraud who specializes in exploiting family relationships for personal gain. The shift in Carol's approach was as predictable as it was pathetic. Realizing that appeals to family loyalty and guilt were no longer effective weapons against me, her tone became increasingly desperate as she began probing for financial assistance disguised as reconciliation. "Patricia, I know we've had our differences, but we're still family," she said, her voice taking on the artificial warmth of someone attempting to manipulate a mark. "I'm in serious financial trouble because of these legal costs and the restitution requirements. You've always been successful with your restoration business, and I know Mother left you comfortable financially. If you could just help me out with enough money to get back on my feet, maybe we could work together to heal the family." The calculated cruelty of attempting to extract money from the very person she had tried to destroy was stunning in its audacity. She was still trying to profit from our relationship, still attempting to use family bonds as leverage for personal gain, even after being convicted of fraud and conspiracy. "I remember how close we used to be as children," Carol continued when I didn't respond immediately. "We had our whole lives ahead of us, and we shared so many dreams and plans. Surely you can find it in your heart to help your sister in her time of need. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for the kind of support that family members should provide for each other." But I was no longer the woman who could be manipulated through appeals to family loyalty or childhood memories. Carol's systematic abuse had transformed me into someone far more dangerous to her continued manipulation, someone who could see through her tactics with complete clarity and respond with cold, calculated precision. "Carol, I said, my voice carrying the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. The sister you're referring to, the relationship you claim to value, was destroyed by your pathological jealousy and your willingness to sacrifice family bonds for personal gain. You chose to weaponize Jennifer against me, to fabricate evidence of theft, and to systematically defame my character in pursuit of money that was never rightfully yours. I took a deep breath, feeling the power of complete emotional detachment flowing through me like a cleansing river. There will be no financial assistance, no family reconciliation, and no private arrangements that allow you to escape the full consequences of your fraudulent actions. All future communication will occur solely through legal channels as required by the court orders, and I am ending this conversation permanently. The silence that followed my words was profound, filled with the weight of absolute finality. For the first time in our entire relationship, Carol was hearing her sister speak to her with complete emotional detachment, without the underlying current of family loyalty that she had taken for granted and exploited for decades. I hung up the phone with a decisive click and immediately blocked her number, along with every other method she might use to contact me directly. The physical act of severing that final connection felt like cutting the last chain that had bound me to years of manipulation and psychological torture. As I sat in the peaceful quiet of my living room, surrounded by the family heirlooms I had preserved with such care and the documentation that had exposed their lies so completely, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete and impenetrable peace. The broken woman they had tried to create was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood her own worth and refused to accept anything less than genuine respect and honesty. They had underestimated me completely, assuming that family bonds and maternal instincts would always make me vulnerable to their manipulation. Instead, their calculated cruelty had forged me into something far more formidable, a woman who knew her own truth and possessed both the evidence and the strength to defend it against anyone who tried to distort or steal it. The phone never rang again. 2 years had passed since that final devastating phone call with Carol, 2 years during which my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined when I first discovered Mother's hidden recordings. The legal victories had been complete and decisive, resulting not only in Carol's criminal conviction, but in my emergence as a nationally recognized advocate for protecting elderly Americans from family fraud and inheritance manipulation. The invitation to curate a major exhibition at the prestigious Metropolitan Museum of American Heritage felt like the ultimate vindication of everything I had fought to preserve. Treasures Restored, a legacy of love and craftsmanship, would showcase 15 of the most significant family heirlooms I had meticulously restored over the years, along with detailed documentation of the restoration processes and the historical significance of each piece. The exhibition opening was scheduled for a Thursday evening in November, with an anticipated attendance of over 300 guests, including museum curators, art historians, legal professionals specializing in estate law, and journalists covering the growing national awareness of elder abuse. This represented the pinnacle of professional recognition for my work in preservation and advocacy. As I stood near the centerpiece of the exhibition, Mother's restored mahogany jewelry box with its intricate mother-of-pearl inlay gleaming under the museum lighting, I felt a profound sense of purpose and accomplishment. The accompanying placard detailed not only the technical aspects of the restoration, but the legal battle that had been fought to preserve these treasures for future generations. I was engaged in conversation with Dr. Amanda Richardson, the museum's chief curator, when I noticed a disturbance near the main entrance. Jennifer was approaching through the crowd, her appearance shocking in its obvious distress and exhaustion. The confident young woman I remembered had been replaced by someone who looked like she hadn't slept properly in months, her clothes wrinkled, and her eyes carrying the haunted expression of someone who had finally confronted devastating truth. Behind her, moving with the desperate energy of someone making a final reckless gambit, was Michael. His appearance was even more disturbing than Jennifer's, his once polished exterior replaced by the disheveled look of someone whose world had completely collapsed. His eyes darted frantically around the room, taking in the elegant crowd and the obvious success of my exhibition with what appeared to be barely controlled rage. The museum staff and guests began to take notice as Michael pushed through the crowd with increasing agitation, his voice rising above the polite conversation that had filled the gallery moments before. "This is all a lie," he shouted, his words echoing off the museum's high ceilings. "All of this success, all of this praise, it's built on destroying innocent people." Dr. Richardson moved quickly to signal security, but I raised my hand to indicate they should wait. Something told me that this confrontation needed to play out completely, that Michael's desperate outburst would serve a purpose far beyond his intention to humiliate me. "Patricia Morrison is not the hero you think she is," Michael continued, his voice cracking with emotion as museum guests turned to stare in fascination and horror. "She's a cruel, unforgiving mother who destroyed her own family for money and fame. She ruined Aunt Carol's life, sent an elderly woman to prison, and turned her own daughter against everyone who tried to help her." The accusations poured out of him in a torrent of desperate fury, each word carefully chosen to paint me as a vindictive woman who had used her professional skills and legal resources to destroy innocent family members who had simply tried to protect their rightful inheritance. His performance was designed to recreate the gaslighting narrative that had once been so effective, but now it rang hollow in the refined atmosphere of the museum. Jennifer stood frozen beside him, her face a mask of anguish as she watched her former fiancé make a complete spectacle of himself in front of some of the most respected professionals in the art and legal communities. Her silence spoke volumes about her own growing understanding of the man she had once planned to marry. The crowd's reaction was a mixture of shock and uncomfortable fascination as they witnessed what appeared to be a deeply personal family crisis playing out in one of the city's most prestigious cultural institutions. Some guests who knew only my public reputation as an advocate and restorer began murmuring among themselves, clearly disturbed by the raw emotion and desperate accusations they were hearing. For a moment, I felt the familiar sensation of public humiliation washing over me, the weight of collective attention focused on deeply personal pain that was being weaponized against me in a professional setting. The carefully controlled environment of the museum exhibition was being transformed into a stage for Michael's final attempt to destroy my credibility and reputation. But as I stood there, surrounded by the tangible evidence of my life's work and the community of people who understood my true character, I realized that this moment was fundamentally different from the previous attacks I had endured. I was no longer the isolated gaslit victim who could be destroyed by lies and manipulation. I was someone who had fought for truth and won, someone whose integrity had been validated by courts, journalists, and professional peers. Michael's increasingly incoherent rants about my supposed cruelty and vindictiveness were actually serving to expose his own desperation and instability to an audience of educated professionals who could recognize psychological manipulation when they witnessed it firsthand. Every word he screamed only reinforced the narrative of his own guilt and Carol's systematic fraud. I remained perfectly still and composed, allowing Michael to fully reveal his emotional breakdown and sense of entitlement to an audience that included several journalists and legal professionals who would undoubtedly document this public meltdown. His desperate attempt to resurrect the lies that had already been thoroughly debunked was providing me with additional evidence of the ongoing harassment I had endured. Most importantly, I could see the profound conflict playing out on Jennifer's face as she watched the man she had once trusted completely humiliate himself, and by extension, her in front of the very people who had validated my integrity and professional standing. This public breakdown was forcing her to confront the reality of what Michael truly was and what she had chosen to support in her betrayal of our relationship. The morning after Michael's spectacular public meltdown at the museum brought an opportunity I had not anticipated but was fully prepared to embrace. Footage of his unhinged attack on my character had been recorded by multiple attendees and was already circulating on social media and news websites, creating exactly the kind of public relations disaster that would serve my purposes perfectly. Margaret Chen, who had attended the exhibition opening and witnessed Michael's breakdown firsthand, recognized immediately that this moment represented the perfect opportunity to deliver a final devastating blow to anyone who might still question the validity of my legal victories or the justice of Michael and Carol's public disgrace. Within 18 hours of Michael's outburst, Margaret had organized a comprehensive press conference in the same conference room where we had first exposed Carol's fraud 2 years earlier. The timing was strategic and powerful. Major news outlets were already covering the story of an elder abuse advocate being attacked at her own museum exhibition, and Michael's public breakdown had captured national attention as an example of how perpetrators of family fraud respond when their victims achieve success and recognition. The press conference was attended by representatives from major television networks, newspapers, and online news platforms, along with several legal professionals specializing in elder abuse and family fraud. The setup was designed to present not just my vindication, but a comprehensive education about the tactics used by family members who prey on elderly relatives and the importance of supporting victims who find the courage to fight back. Elena Martinez had prepared a stunning multimedia presentation that juxtaposed Michael's desperate accusations from the museum with the calm, factual evidence that had already been validated by courts and professional experts. The contrast between his emotional manipulation and my documented proof was so stark that it served as a textbook example of how abusers attempt to discredit their victims even after being exposed. Ladies and gentlemen, Margaret began her voice, carrying the authority of someone who had won landmark cases in elder abuse law. Last night's attack on my client at her museum exhibition provides us with a unique opportunity to demonstrate how perpetrators of family fraud continue their psychological warfare even after being convicted of their crimes and exposed to public scrutiny. The evidence presentation was methodical and devastating in its completeness. We played excerpts from Mother's original recordings, allowing the audience to hear in her own words her explicit wishes for the family heirlooms and her prophetic warnings about Carol's manipulative nature. The audio quality was pristine, the content undeniable, and the emotional impact profound. Most powerfully, we presented a side-by-side comparison of Michael's accusations from the museum with the documented evidence that had already been validated by forensic experts, criminal courts, and professional organizations. Every claim he had made was systematically refuted with objective proof, creating a devastating demonstration of how psychological manipulation attempts to override factual reality. The forensic analysis of my restoration work was presented with scientific precision, showing not only the authenticity of every piece in the exhibition, but the obvious skill and care I had invested in preserving our family's heritage. The contrast between my meticulous documentation and Carol's fabricated claims was so overwhelming that it rendered Michael's desperate accusations completely absurd. When it was my turn to address the cameras directly, I felt the same calm confidence that had carried me through 2 years of legal battles and public scrutiny. I spoke not with anger or vindictiveness, but with the measured precision of someone who had fought for truth and emerged victorious. Michael Davidson's outburst last night demonstrates exactly what happens when people who have built their lives on lies and manipulation are forced to confront the consequences of their actions. I stated, with quiet authority. Rather than accepting responsibility for his role in a criminal conspiracy to defraud me of my inheritance, he chose to make one final desperate attempt to resurrect the false narrative that had already been thoroughly debunked by objective evidence. I paused, allowing the weight of my words to settle, before addressing Jennifer directly through the cameras. To my daughter Jennifer, who witnessed last night's breakdown, you now have the opportunity to see clearly the character of the man you once planned to marry and the people you chose to believe over your own mother. The evidence of their deception is overwhelming and undeniable. The choice of what to do with this truth is entirely yours. The questions from reporters were thorough and pointed, but every inquiry only provided additional opportunities to highlight the strength of our evidence and the completeness of our legal victory. When asked about the possibility of ongoing harassment from Michael or other family members, Margaret announced that we were seeking additional restraining orders and considering charges for witness intimidation and continued defamation. The impact of the press conference was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, every major news outlet in the country was covering the story with headlines focusing on the systematic nature of family fraud and the importance of supporting elderly victims who find the courage to expose their abusers. Social media exploded with support for my courage and condemnation of Michael's continued harassment. The hashtag #StandWithPatricia began trending as thousands of people shared their own stories of family manipulation and inheritance fraud, creating a national conversation about protecting vulnerable elderly Americans from predatory relatives. Michael's professional and social rehabilitation became impossible as the full scope of his manipulation and the evidence of his ongoing harassment were broadcast to a national audience. His attempts to rebuild his career were permanently derailed, and his public breakdown at the museum became a cautionary tale about the consequences of participating in elder abuse schemes. Carol's conviction was highlighted as an example of how the legal system could successfully prosecute family fraud when victims possessed proper documentation and the courage to seek justice. Her prison sentence and financial penalties were praised as appropriate consequences for someone who had systematically exploited family relationships for personal gain. Most importantly, the coverage focused on the broader implications of my case for protecting elderly Americans and ensuring that family heirlooms and legacies were preserved according to the true wishes of their original owners, rather than the manipulative schemes of greedy relatives. Jennifer's position became increasingly untenable as friends, extended family members, and professional colleagues witnessed the undeniable evidence of Michael's character and her former complicity in his schemes. The engagement ring she had once displayed so proudly was now seen as evidence of her poor judgment, rather than a symbol of love and success. 8 months had passed since the press conference that sealed Michael's public humiliation and professional destruction. The restraining orders had been granted and enforced, the additional criminal charges had been filed and prosecuted, and my life had settled into a rhythm of meaningful work and genuine relationships that felt like a rebirth after decades of family manipulation and toxicity. My advocacy work had expanded beyond individual cases to include legislative testimony about strengthening protections for elderly Americans and educational programs for estate planning professionals. The exhibition had traveled to museums across the country, raising awareness about both historical preservation and the importance of protecting family legacies from fraudulent schemes. It was on a quiet Sunday afternoon in early spring when I heard footsteps on my front porch, followed by a tentative knock that carried none of the aggressive confidence I associated with previous confrontations. Through the window, I could see Jennifer sitting on my front steps, her posture conveying the exhausted defeat of someone who had finally run out of options and illusions. The woman who approached my door bore little resemblance to the daughter I remembered, or even to the angry accuser who had betrayed me 2 years earlier. Jennifer looked like she had aged a decade in the months since the museum incident, her face gaunt, and her eyes carrying the hollow expression of someone who had been forced to confront devastating truths about herself and the people she had trusted. When I opened the door, Jennifer looked up with eyes that held no trace of the righteous anger or manipulated certainty that had characterized our previous encounters. Her entire demeanor conveyed a brokenness that went far beyond mere embarrassment or social consequence. This was someone whose entire understanding of reality had been shattered by irrefutable evidence. "Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I know I have no right to be here. I know what I've done to you, to us, to everything we once had together. Michael is gone, the engagement is over, and everyone I trusted has been exposed as liars and criminals. I've lost everything, and it's all because I chose to believe their lies instead of trusting the mother who raised me with nothing but love and honesty." The words poured out of her in a torrent of genuine remorse and self-recrimination that felt fundamentally different from the calculated apologies I had learned to recognize during my legal battles. This wasn't strategic manipulation designed to achieve a specific outcome. This was the raw confession of someone who had finally understood the magnitude of her betrayal. "I was so stupid, so blind, so willing to believe that you could be capable of theft and deception." Jennifer continued, tears streaming down her face. "Michael convinced me that family loyalty meant supporting him and Aunt Carol, that questioning their story would make me a bad daughter and a naive woman. I let him manipulate my love for you into a weapon against you." She spoke about the gradual realization that had begun during Michael's museum breakdown and accelerated through the subsequent press coverage and legal proceedings. Watching him humiliate himself publicly had forced her to confront the possibility that everything she believed about our family conflict had been carefully constructed, lies designed to serve his financial ambitions and Carol's pathological envy. "I've seen all the evidence, now heard Grandma's recordings, reviewed your restoration logs, read every news article and court document," Jennifer said, her voice breaking with the weight of her admissions. "You were telling the truth about everything, and I chose to believe people who were systematically destroying the woman who had given me everything. I don't know how to live with what I've done." I stood in my doorway, listening to my daughter's litany of regret and belated understanding, feeling remarkably little of the vindication or maternal relief that she was probably hoping to inspire. The broken woman who would have welcomed any acknowledgement of wrongdoing from Jennifer was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true accountability required more than words, spoken only after consequences became unavoidable. Jennifer's contrition appeared genuine, but it was also motivated by her own losses and isolation, rather than by any deep understanding of the pain she had inflicted. Her focus remained primarily on her own suffering, her own mistakes, her own need for forgiveness and reconciliation. She spoke about our sacred bond and her terrible loss of direction, but there was little recognition of how her choices had affected my life or my ability to trust in family relationships. While I could see that Jennifer's remorse was real, I also understood that the relationship she was hoping to rebuild no longer existed. The mother who had loved unconditionally and forgiven repeatedly had been transformed by the systematic betrayal and public humiliation into someone who valued peace and authenticity above all other considerations. My response was delivered with the same calm detachment that had carried me through 2 years of legal battles and public scrutiny. Jennifer, I can see that you're genuinely sorry for the choices you made and the pain you caused. I understand that you were manipulated by people who specialized in exploiting family relationships for personal gain. But acknowledging your mistakes doesn't automatically restore what was destroyed by those mistakes. I paused, studying the face of the daughter I had once loved more than life itself, feeling only a distant sadness for the relationship that could never be recovered. You chose their lies over my truth. You chose Michael's greed over our history together. You chose to publicly humiliate and abandon the mother who had never given you reason to doubt her integrity. Those choices have consequences that go far beyond legal proceedings or social embarrassment. Jennifer's face crumpled as she began to understand that this was not a negotiation or an opportunity for immediate reconciliation, but a statement of how fundamentally our relationship had been altered by her betrayal. Please, Mom, there has to be some way to fix this. I know I was wrong. I know I hurt you terribly, but I'm still your daughter. There has to be some possibility of healing between us. You will always be my biological daughter, I replied with gentle but unshakable firmness. But the relationship you destroyed through your willingness to betray my character and support my accusers cannot be restored through a single conversation motivated by your own isolation and regret. My peace and emotional well-being are my highest priorities now, and protecting that peace means maintaining appropriate boundaries with people who have proven themselves capable of such profound betrayal. I stepped back into my house, my hand on the door handle, as I delivered my final words to this chapter of our relationship. If you're genuinely committed to understanding the damage that was done and addressing the character flaws that made you vulnerable to their manipulation, I suggest you seek professional counseling to help you process these experiences. Any future contact between us will need to go through a qualified therapist who can help facilitate honest communication and appropriate boundaries. I closed the door quietly, but decisively, engaging the deadbolt with a firm click that felt like the final punctuation mark on 28 years of maternal hope and disappointment. Through the window, I watched Jennifer sit on my steps for nearly an hour, her shoulders shaking with what appeared to be genuine grief for everything she had lost through her own choices. Eventually, she stood and walked away, and while I felt a deep sadness for the broken woman she had become, I also felt an overwhelming sense of relief that I was finally free from the burden of trying to maintain relationships with people who had proven themselves capable of such calculated cruelty and betrayal. The woman who stands in my restoration studio today, carefully cleaning a Civil War-era daguerreotype donated to our local historical society, bears little resemblance to the devastated victim who once sat alone in her living room, convinced that her family's heirlooms had been stolen and her reality had been distorted beyond recognition. The legal victories were comprehensive and satisfying, but the personal transformation has been far more profound and lasting than any court judgment could ever be. My work has evolved far beyond individual restoration projects to encompass a national mission of protecting America's cultural heritage and the elderly Americans who serve as its guardians. The Patricia Morrison Foundation for Heritage Protection now provides legal assistance, expert testimony, and emotional support for elderly victims of family fraud, ensuring that no other grandmother or grandfather will face alone the kind of systematic manipulation I endured. The traveling exhibition has visited over 40 museums nationwide, educating hundreds of thousands of visitors about both historical preservation techniques and the importance of protecting family legacies from those who would exploit them for personal gain. Each display includes not only the beautifully restored heirlooms, but also the documentation that exposed the fraud, creating a powerful narrative about the triumph of truth over manipulation. My days are filled with genuine relationships, meaningful work, and the profound satisfaction that comes from a life lived with complete authenticity. The community I have built consists of people who value integrity, courage, and truth above convenience or social harmony, creating the kind of supportive environment I never knew was possible during the toxic years of family manipulation. Jennifer has begun therapy, as I suggested, and our relationship exists now in a carefully defined space of cautious rebuilding, marked by professional mediation and clearly established boundaries. The unconditional maternal love that was weaponized against me has been replaced by something more sustainable, conditional respect that must be earned through consistent demonstration of character and integrity. I have transformed from someone who defined her worth through others' approval into someone who understands that the most precious legacy is not what we inherit, but what we preserve and pass forward through our own courage and determination. The patient, often tolerating woman who had enabled decades of manipulation became a fierce advocate for truth and a living example that it is never too late to reclaim your power and dignity. The philosophical lesson that emerges from this journey resonates far beyond the specifics of family fraud or inheritance disputes. Family heirlooms are more than mere objects. They are tangible connections to our history, our values, and our identity as human beings who are part of something larger than ourselves. When greed and envy corrupt these sacred bonds, only truth meticulously preserved and courageously revealed can restore what was meant to be protected and cherished. The peace I have achieved is not the fragile hope of someone waiting for others to change, but the unshakable serenity of someone who knows her own worth and refuses to compromise her integrity for the comfort of others. This hard-won tranquility, built on validated reality and authentic relationships, represents the most precious legacy of all, a life lived with absolute truth as its foundation. Yesterday evening, as I carefully applied conservation treatments to a 19th century family Bible donated by a widow whose own relatives had tried to claim it belonged to them, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment of purpose and peace. My hands, once trembling with devastation and betrayal, now moved with steady confidence, healing both history and hearts with every careful restoration. Some legacies are etched in stone, but the strongest are restored by truth and cherished by an unyielding heart.